I'm going to go ahead and explain how to make your economy quilt block square. We have the paper pattern here and all of the other things that are ready to go. So the pattern is a free pattern that I found online, and it's from Generations Quilt Patterns. And they actually have the economy block in a variety of sizes. So today we're going to be using the 6-inch quilt block. And I pre-cut my fabric. It's ready to go. And so now I'm going to choose the colors and mark them on the pattern so I'm ready to go. So first of all, we have the center square. And then the next round is going to be with this purple polka dot fabric. Get it set up here. And then the final pieces will be this bright pink. And what it means is we're going to replicate this layout onto the paper pattern and mark it so that while we're sewing, we don't forget which piece goes where. So starting with my orange colored pencil, it's fine, just like scribble the colors in. It doesn't have to be like perfect or nicely colored. And then for our final round, we're going to do the pink. All right, and we're done. So for our next step in the process, we're going to go ahead and number the pieces on our pattern. So let me put these pieces of fabric away. So the first, the number is the center square block, and then we number the corner ones 2, 3, 4, 5, and I did it clockwise. And then the outer pink ones in the same manner, 6, 7, 8, 9. Most foundation paper piecing patterns are already numbered. For whatever reason, this pattern did not have numbers. So the important thing is to start with the number 1 and then do 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9. It doesn't really matter if you go clockwise or counterclockwise as long as you're consistent. So on this pattern, it happens to have these dotted or dashed lines, and you don't sew on those. Those are just placement guides for helping you know where to put each pattern piece. But sometimes it's confusing. So go ahead and put like little X marks on those dashed lines just to remind you not to sew on them. It's just around the center square. Okay, so next what we're going to do is going to make it easier if you can see the lines on the back of the paper. So at my workstation here, I can see the lines showing through the paper, so I'm going to just trace them. Just the solid lines. And if you're using a paper that you can see through, you don't have to trace it. But if you're using a paper that is not see-through or transparent, then you need to go ahead and trace it to make it easier. For me, I could see the lines, so I could trace them. If you can't see them, you can put it on a light box, or you can tape it to a window and just trace the lines that way. Looking good. So the last thing we need to get this pattern piece ready is we're going to start with our highest number. So my highest number is the number 9. So for the number 9, we need to extend the sewing line into the seam allowance on both sides. So we're making that line bigger. And then the next one is number 8. And when we do number 8, we notice that the extension from number 9 already blocks off one side of number 8. So we just need to extend it on the side that is not blocked by another pencil line. And for number 7, again, one side is already blocked by the extension from the number 8. So we just need to make number 7 longer on one side. And then when we get to number 6, both are blocked, so we're done. So extending those lines is going to help you know when to continue sewing into the seam allowance. That will just lock down all of the edges, and then when you put your blocks together, you won't have any problems. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to make our pattern page smaller. So there's that dark line, and then the dotted line on the outside of that. And then you want to cut even bigger than that dotted line. You want to have lots of extra space around. Remember, use your paper scissors, not your fabric scissors. You need your paper scissors for this. And we're just going to trim off the extra along the edges. So our pattern is ready, and so now we're ready to start sewing. And again, you're going to be sewing on the paper with the fabric. So we're going to start with number 1, which is that center block. So get your square fabric, that's going to be your central, like your highlighted motif. Get that piece. And now you're going to actually add it onto the back of this paper. So flip your paper so that it's on the back, and place it on top of that square that you traced, making sure that you have extra fabric around all 4 edges so that you have space for the seam allowance. Again, with the glue, just a little bit. Don't apply it too heavily. Once you have it where you think it needs to be, hold it up to the light and just double check to make sure that there's enough space all the way around for the seam allowance. You can see from the shadow here that there's at least 1/4 of an inch around all 4 of the lines. So this is a good spot for my block. So we've glued number 1, we've tacked it down, and now we're gonna work on number 2. Number 2 is directly above number 1, the way I wrote my numbers. So use the side of your ruler that kind of comes to a point. Don't use the side that's thicker. And then again, we're using the dark solid line. Don't fold it on the dotted line. Fold the paper back towards you, and then you should have an edge of fabric sticking up. And so now we're going to use the side of the ruler that's thicker or has that little ledge on it. And you want to place it so the ledge hooks into where the paper is folded. And the ledge should extend beyond the edge of that fold. And if you're an adult who's using a rotary cutter, then just use your rotary cutter and cut right along the side of that ruler. But in our sewing club, what we're going to do is we're going to mark that edge with a pencil, and then use the pair of scissors that's in your zip packet and just cut along that line. And now we are ready to add our piece number 2, which for me is this purple polka dot fabric. And so I'm going to put it on my mat so that the point of the arrow or the shape of the triangle is pointed towards me, and there's that long flat edge along the top. And then I'm going to take my square, which, I folded it back, and I put the fabric for number 1 piece right side out. And then my number 2 piece, the triangle, is right sides up. And so it's going to be right sides together, or both of the pretty sides of the fabric coming together. And then for my piece, it's cut very generously, which makes it easier for my students. But for you, this might be smaller. So it's really important to make sure that you have extra on either side of those future seam lines so that you have space for your seam allowance. The other thing you need to be careful about is that fabric on the back can sometimes shift. It can slide up or down or go sideways, and then it won't sew onto the right place. So keep it in place. Okay, so we're going to take it to the sewing machine, but before we start sewing, check and make sure that your stitch size is set to 1.5. Like right now mine is set to 2, so I'm going to change my stitch size to 1.5, which is a really tiny stitch, but using that smaller stitch is going to help when you tear the paper out because you won't break a thread. So when you pick this up, be very careful to hold the 2 edges of that piece number 2 so it doesn't slide around. You want to fold the paper back up so that you can see where to sew on the front of it. And everything should be lined up and ready to go. And very carefully put it into your machine so it doesn't catch and fold or shift. You're going to be sewing on that first solid line that is between piece number 1 and piece number 2, the solid line, not the dashed line. On that solid line, and you're not going to start at the far corner, you're going to start just slightly in front of it because you need to backstitch and then go forward past where you originally started to the far corner and then backstitch again. It's really important to backstitch at the beginning and end of the seam. So that way your thread won't come undone, especially as you're tearing out the paper later. And you can see my seam line. Since we've sewn this on, we now need to fold piece number 2 back. And first of all, we're going to press with our finger and just make sure that you press it all the way back and that you finger press it enough that it's staying down where it should. And then use your seam roller and a little bit of muscle and really flatten that seam. This is going to act like our iron. And we have a really nice second piece. What we don't want is for it to get pressed so it's not tight along that seam line. You want it pressed all the way back to the edge of the seam line. You don't want a fold that's not exactly in line with your seam line. So for the kids who are sewing along with me, go ahead and put a little bit of glue, a very tiny little dab of glue inside of that triangle that you traced, and then press the fabric back so that it will hold in place. And then it's not going to flop down and cause problems for you later. It will stay like tacked down in place and it'll make things easier. Piece number 1 is attached and we sewed the seam onto piece number 2. And now we're going to work on number 3. I'm going clockwise, so it will be to my right. And this is going to be the same color fabric. For me, it's going to be the purple polka dots. And we're going to use that same fabric for the first round that we sew on. And in the same way that we did before, we are going to use our ruler to press our paper back right along that first line. And then use the side of the ruler with the ledge to cut 1/4 inch away from the folded paper. So use your rotary cutter if you're an adult. If you're in my sewing club, mark it with a pencil and then use a pair of scissors. If your fabric is really dark, like maybe it's black or navy blue, then use a colored pencil, like a white colored pencil or yellow colored pencil, and then you'll be able to see the line you draw. You can also use a chalk pencil if you have one. And now cut along that line that you drew so that you have a clean, smooth edge to work with. So both our piece number 1 and the corner of our piece number 2 has been trimmed, so it's a nice, long, smooth edge along that top. So we're following that same process, and we are going to use our purple piece of fabric, which I placed wrong. It needs to be right side up, or the pretty side of the fabric up, and the point pointing towards you as you're sewing. And then we're going to take this and line up that edge that we just trimmed, centered on the new piece of fabric. And the most important thing is that it's centered along that triangle. On the left side, you have a little bit of extra room because you have the previous purple triangle. Just focus on the center, on the actual piece of paper, that drawn triangle, and make sure it is centered on the new piece of purple. So my new piece of purple is pretty wide here because I made it generous and made it easier. And now I have enough seam allowance along all of the edges. And you'll notice that if you put it the right way, the point of your triangle will be about in the center of your piece number 1. So hold it carefully in place so that it doesn't move, slip, or slide. Hold on to it. And then carefully put it on the bed of your machine. Again, starting a little bit in front of the corner. Backstitch into the corner and then go straight along that solid line all the way to the next corner. And then at that next corner, you're going to again backstitch. So your threads are locked on both ends of the seam. And do not sew on the dashed line, sew on the solid line. Okay, so I have my second piece sewn on, and you can see where I stitched. And then we are going to fold it back and pull it tight against that seam line and press with our fingers first, and then grab our seam roller and really flatten it down. Now, again, I suggest anyone who's new to FPP, or if you are in my sewing club, learning how to sew this, put a tiny, very light dab of glue that's going to tack down that second piece. So 1 is finished, 2 is finished, 3 is finished, and now we're moving on to piece number 4. And it's the exact same process. I'm not going to pause and explain a lot this time. Just watch the video to remember the steps before you do this yourself. Backstitch at the start. Lock in the stitches at the next end by backstitching again. Finger press, and then you use your muscles. Just as a reminder to avoid a common mistake that's heartbreaking, you want to always, always, always cut 1/4 of an inch away from the folded piece of paper, not exactly on the folded paper line. Because if you cut on the folded paper line, essentially you have to start all over again. It's almost impossible to rescue it at that point. And just like that, we have our final piece sewn on for our, on my block, the round of purple polka dotted triangles. Again, make sure you're matching what you're sewing on to what you marked on your pattern as far as the color. And now it's really important that you continue to follow the numbers, because when we extended the lines, we did that based on the numbering system. So if you don't start with the right piece at this point, the lines will not have been extended in the correct places. So find piece number 6 And if you notice when you fold it back on mine, because my polka dotted fabric was cut so generously, there's a huge amount of overhang here. It's much bigger than is needed. So you are going to trim a lot off, and that is okay. You're still doing the right thing. If you cut your triangle pieces smaller so they're closer to the right size, then you're just going to be trimming a little bit off. So it really depends on how you cut your fabric. Slide the ledge of your ruler just on the other side of the paper fold. So you have your 1/4 inch, and then you can trim to size. The outside row is done precisely the same way, but each of the pieces are bigger than the purple pieces. The final size of the purple pieces is smaller, whereas the pink ones are bigger. So now as you're doing this final row, you really have to make sure that everything is centered and fits perfectly, and that there is extra along the edge. If you don't, then you have to take out all of those stitches and replace it and start again on that piece, which you don't want to do. So at the edge of where the line stops that you traced, you can kind of fold it back since we're on the outer row, and see how far out my pink is sticking. So that is plenty of space. There's plenty of space to cover the seam allowance. And then the same thing on the other side. There's the edge of the line that I traced, and then that's the edge of my pink fabric piece. So you need to have a generous amount of fabric on either side. And then you tip that paper up and carefully transfer it to your sewing machine. So now you'll notice that where we extended those pencil lines, you want to start sewing piece number 6 slightly in front of that pencil line that we drew, and then stitch back on the line to where the pencil line intersects, and then go straight all the way down to the next pencil line. For this piece, you have extended pencil lines blocking the edge of your seam on both sides, so make sure you stay within those pencil lines. So you can see I'm pointing at where that pencil line intersects, and I'm gonna go all the way across to the next pencil line intersection and stay inside those two. And exact same way, flip open, finger press, seam roll. Tiny, tiny bit of glue, but this time you want it kind of close to that far corner where you traced. So put it just inside that corner. Tiny dab of glue. Very light, not thick. So 6 is finished. Moving on to 7. Again, at this point, it's crucial you follow the order. So go to piece number 7. So on piece number 7, we have this line that we've penciled in all to towards the dashed line on the outside. And you want to make sure you sew along that pencil line that you drew. So start past the solid line. So when I'm looking at it, for me, it's along the top is where my pencil line extends. And then at the bottom is where my pencil line is blocked by the next seam I'm going to sew. So again, just make sure that wherever there is a pencil line that lines up with the seam that you're sewing, that you sew all the way to the end of that back stitch and then continue sewing. So what I just sewed goes from where my scissors are pointing here I got off track, all the way to that dotted dashed line along the pencil mark that I extended. Hopefully that makes sense. Try to make sure that you do finish your seam before the dotted or dashed line. You don't want to sew beyond the dashed line because you'll be trimming along that line and you don't want your threads to get cut. 6 and 7 are done, and moving on to number 8. And like 7, one side has a pencil line that extends to the dashed line. So I'm going to make sure I sew that part and then stop before my future seam line blocks the other end. So I place my pink triangle so the point is towards me, and then I make sure I have space, extra room on either side before I go ahead and sew it down. Trim a 1/4 inch past the fold line, not against the fold line. For number 9, both of the ends of the line are going to be extended up to the dashed line. So you are going to sew both ends all the way to the dashed line, back stitching at both ends. It's pretty. And I'm done sewing. What you're going to do next is get an adult and ask them to please trim your block for you. So an adult is going to trim the block along the dashed lines with a rotary cutter and ruler. And it should end up being 6.5 inches at this point because it's unfinished. So you still have the seam allowances for connecting it to the next block. Lovely. So in Sewing Club with me, you're going to make 2 of these blocks. One you are going to keep for yourself, and you can choose between making a t-shirt with that block, making a zip pouch with that block, or making a greeting card. Your second block, I'm going to collect one from each of you, and then we're going to put them together and make a quilt, which we will then do a raffle as a fundraiser for the elementary department fund to support our department. Okay? Have fun.